This is Hero News.
A very good afternoon. This is Hero News at 2. My name is Koyo, and these are some of the stories we have on the news today. Jail time for Garissa attackers. Governor Lich Kinyanjui appointments finally, and 222 million for ex-soldiers. Of course, and in sports, we'll be looking at the Copa America and see what is actually going to happen between Brazil and Peru in the final. These are the stories. We start in Garissa today. A Nairobi court on Wednesday sentenced 3 men to terms ranging from 41 years to life in prison for abetting the massacre of 148 people by Al-Shabaab militants at Garissa University in 2015. Chief Magistrate Francis Andanyi handed a lifetime sentence to a Tanzanian national and 41 years in jail for his 2 Kenyan co-accused convicted of carrying out the terrorist attack. Chief Magistrate Francis Andanyi said that he considered the helpless nature of the victims, mostly students, rounded up at dawn on their campus by gunmen and shot point blank when determining the sentence of the 2. And we come back to Nakuru. The fate of Nakuru County Public Service Board, whose members and secretariat had been suspended earlier this year, has been sealed by Governor Lee Kinyanjui. This actually happened on Wednesday. Governor nominated 4 new members, and a secretary to the board, and forwarded their names to the county assembly for vetting. Those nominated as members are Miss Mary Yepan, Miss Ser Mwangi, Mr. Simon Kabwet, Mr. Paul Mudagia. The governor also nominated Miss Joyce Njeri Ndegwa as the board secretary. And the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres will visit Kenya next week. His spokesperson has now confirmed. The 70-year-old Portuguese former diplomat is actually scheduled to hold talks with President Kenyatta and to address the July 10 opening session of an African high-level regional conference on counter-terrorism. Mr. Guterres is due to take part in a town hall-style meeting with youth involved in programs to prevent violent extremism. The United Nations has now given those details. The counter-terrorism event will be held at the UN office in Nairobi, and it will actually enable African leaders to share good practices in counter-terrorism, according to the conference organizers, that is. And the parliament has now ordered the government to pay 39 former soldiers Kenya shillings 222 million for unfair dismissal and inhumane treatment during the 1982 coup attempt. The Senate's National Treasury Defense and Foreign Relations Committee on Wednesday said that the state can no longer subject the soldiers to unfair treatment over the compensation claim. The case has been in the corridors of justice for the last 30 years, but the government has continued to ignore the court's directive. In their petition to the Senate, the soldiers said they were arrested, tortured, detained, imprisoned for 6 months to several years without any kind of compensation. Let's move to Homa Bay now. A night out at a bar at Nguku Trading Center in Diwa Sub-County turned tragic when an administration police officer based at the Ngugu camp in Kanyidote ward allegedly killed a victim over a love affair. Witness say the victim, Mr. Witi, 36, and the officer were sitting at the table watching the AFCON match between Kenya and Senegal when the officer invited the barmaid to join them. Mr. Witi, whom local claim was the woman's boyfriend, objected. He and the officer engaged in a verbal exchange which degenerated into a physical fight, during which the officer drew a knife and stabbed him in the stomach. He was actually rushed to the Ndiwa Sub-County Hospital, but the medics there said they could not actually handle his condition and was referred to Homa Bay County Referral Hospital. From Homa Bay, of course, we take a short breather on news right now. International news is actually up in a few seconds. Don't you go away. Let's move to Sudan now for the first international news. The UN said on Wednesday that the conflict in southern Sudan right now has intensified in the region. Of course, since the nation actually signed a peace deal It's been actually less than 2 years since the peace deal was signed, and there is no peace so far so good in southern Sudan. The United Nations mission in Sudan has said that the victims who are actually being affected by these wars are actually people who are very innocent, people who cannot defend themselves. So far so good. What we know is that at least 404 people have been killed in attacks on the villages in the southern region. Of course, the surge in violence has also forced more than 56,000 civilians to flee their homes, becoming displaced in South Sudan itself, while other 20,000 have crossed border into Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, from 99.0 FM, we wish Southern Sudan peace real quick. Let's move to Korea now. North Korea has accused the US of being hell-bent on hostile acts despite a recent agreement between the two countries to resume nuclear talks. Your young delegation to the United Nations said on Wednesday that the US was so obsessed with sanctions. This comes days after the country's two leaders held a historic meeting in the heavily fortified demilitarized zone which divide the two Koreans. Negotiation with Korea and tried to convince it to abandon its controversial nuclear program reached a peak last year when Mr. Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong held a summit in Singapore. They both committed to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula without clarifying what it actually meant. Of course, what we actually know right now is that the meeting between Trump and the Korean leader seemed to really have not borne any fruit, because they're still actually fighting. There's war of words each and every day, but we're actually keeping tabs on that story, and we'll actually give you much update on our subsequent bulletins. A few seconds breather. Sports is actually up next on the program. Don't you go away. We have the latest from the sporting action.
We got Costa with a header. Across got Mignolet. Cahill did it cross the line. Costa!
Of course, Chelsea has actually confirmed former midfielder Frank Lampard as the new coach. He'll actually be replacing Maurizio Sarri, who is actually gone to Juventus. We keep it local football now. Two former Harambee Stars coaches, Jacob Ghost Mulee and Zedekiah Ezekiel Otieno, asked questioned Victor Wanyama's leadership of Harambee Stars following the team's early exit from the ongoing Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt. Stars are actually back in the nation already, of course, alongside Tanzania. What actually Jacob Ghost Mulee said is that Wanyama does not fit to be captain, and he lacks a lot of leadership skills, and he has no respect from his fellow players and the technical bench. Zico also added a few things on that conversation, saying that perhaps Victor Wanyama was actually given the armband because he plays in the English Premier League. Of course, Wanyama has not responded to this these stories actually being pushed in the media already. Of course, the Copa America is actually heading to the final, and we have Brazil actually going against Peru. Of course, Peru are through to the Copa America finals for the first time since 1975. This final is actually interesting because Brazil actually managed to beat Peru 5-0 in the group stages. They're meeting in the final again, and we don't know if Brazil is still going to pull the same again, or Peru have actually learned the lesson. That is all we had for you on the news today. Keep it 99.0 FM. Fiesta Africa continues in a moment.